So, Jeannie, going into this, the Democrats needed to pick up a net 2. If they lost this one, that means they got to take 3 more. Yeah, it's getting harder and harder.
This was almost a must-win for Democrats in order to take the Senate. I mean, it does suggest that the projections that Republicans keep the Senate were on point. We can't forget that the president won Indiana, I think, by about 19 points, almost 20 points. So it is a red state, but certainly a big loss for Democrats. They desperately wanted to keep this, and had they, it would have shown sort of this blue wave. But in this environment in the Senate, the battles for Democrats are really, really tough this year.
So, Doug, coming up on this 9 o'clock closing now, we just had the polls close in Texas. Does this make it less important for Ted Cruz to win?
I think Republicans would like to pad their total, to say the least, and they really went all in to support the Cruz candidacy. And some folks who had previously been relatively chilly with Ted Cruz went down to campaign for him, including the president. I think they'd like to get
some not nice things to say about each other, as I recall.
They had
the presidential election.
It's been a learning experience. But I think that really, if they can solidify that, then the president's strategy of building the Senate as a bulwark against the Democrats will have worked. They've got the judicial appointments then solidly in place for the next 2 years. They can't get things out of the House and pass them through the Senate. He's in good shape going into the year that shall but not be named.
Shannon, you know the White House so well. How big a victory is this from them, from their perception?
Indiana's huge. I mean, they not only are they taking back a seat, but I think it speaks to the president's success out on the campaign trail. They, as Toluse said, campaigned very aggressively in Indiana. They made 2 stops there in the past week. I mean, the vice president, obviously his home state, he was there constantly. So this speaks to the fact that in a red state, the president carries a lot of weight. When he comes there and endorses a candidate and throws his weight behind a candidate, in a red state at least, that sticks. That gives that candidate an enormous boost because, I mean, the polls were not looking, the polls were neck and neck. And the president comes there in the final week, the administration makes this big push, and now all of a sudden you see the Republican candidate pull away.
What about Minnesota and the House races, Toluse?
Yeah, there are a number of interesting races in the House because there are actually some opportunities for Republicans to make pickups in Minnesota because there are some races where President Trump won in those districts and they're represented by Democrats, at least in some cases Democrats who are retiring. So we'll have to test this theory of a blue wave and find out whether or not Republicans actually can take advantage of what appears to be a relatively strong night for them in terms of beating expectations. Are they able to do that and actually pick up seats as well? There are also some pickup opportunities for Democrats as well. And there's a Senate race there where the Democrat looks to be in a pretty good position to continue on in the Senate. But Minnesota is going to be an important race. We're going to be looking at that entire Midwestern area, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, to see whether or not President Trump, who actually was pretty close in 2016, close to winning Minnesota, whether or not his brand continues to be strong there.
I want to say it just a little more strongly. I mean, I agree with all that, but if, for example, Eric Paulson manages to hold on to a seat, that's really good news for Republicans. This is, in a state where they weren't automatically going to do real well. A guy who's on the Ways and Means Committee and, as a result, an author of this highly contentious tax bill, including the state-local provisions. If he prevails, I think that's really good news for Republicans.
I mean, in the Senate, I would say the expectation from the White House was they would pick up 2 to 3 seats. They do not like having this teeny little margin in the Senate. So they don't only want to hold the Senate, they need to get a bigger margin there. And in the House, even if there is no blue wave, if Democrats control that by 1 vote, that's going to wreak all sorts of havoc on this White House, stall their domestic agenda, and lead to just unlimited investigations and subpoenas over the next few years.
Isn't that the real issue in the House? And even 1 vote will give them the power of the gavel, which really means the power of the investigation.
The power of the investigation, and I think we're going to see them, as Shannon mentioned, really make it difficult for the White House to move forward on its agenda, if nothing else because addressing all these investigations, the time and the energy, and then, of course, staff having to put themselves through that personally is very, very difficult for any White House. And I would just say one thing I think we're seeing as we look at Indiana is I do think we are seeing something of a people returning home. If you're a Republican, you're voting Republican. If you're a Democrat, you're voting Democrat. A partisanship in the electorate, the likes of which we probably haven't seen in recent history.